Welcome back. Ew. Welcome back. February, what I read this month. I actually read a good amount of books, and we're going to start off with some stats for the month. I use the app Storygraph. You can get an app on your phone, and it's super simple. You can track like your currently read, what you have read, your TBR, anything. And honestly, if you use Goodreads, which I do use Goodreads as well, but Storygraph just kind of breaks things down a lot more in depth. To jump into it, I'm going to be reading the stats off my phone. You literally can't see. That didn't work. I'll kind of put them right here too as I'm reading them so we can kind of go through them together. So I read 6 books this month, which is a decent amount for me in 1 month. That accumulated to 2,553 pages. That sounds like a lot. That's because I read a really chunky book this month. Well, I didn't read it all this month though. I just finished it this month. So that's why that's kind of big. My 3 biggest moods were tense, dark, and emotional. My pace was mostly medium-paced books with 67% and 33% fast-paced books. I'm not the biggest fan of like slow burners. I like to be entertained the entire time. As far as page number, 50% of the books that I read were between 300 and 499 pages. So that's like the sweet spot for me. It's like, that's perfect. I love that like page range. 100% fiction books. Sounds about right. I don't read a lot of nonfiction, but I'm planning on it, so maybe that'll change. As far as genres, I read 3 contemporary, 2 thrillers, 2 romance, 1 mystery, and 1 fantasy. And then I read 60% print books, so that's physical, and 33% digital. So again, I like to kind of mix it up a little bit. When I've read too many physical books, I want to switch to either my Kindle or my iPad because I feel like I read a lot faster on there. Average rating was 4.42 stars, so read a lot of good books this month. And honestly, looking back, I don't even know what book will be my favorite because I did rate some 5 stars. I rated 2 of them 5 stars, 2 out of 6. That's a good amount. Last year, I think I had maybe a total of 5 or 6 5-star reads, and I read 53 books, so that was kind of a quick recap on the types of books, and just so you guys are kind of more know what to expect as far as what I read this month. But for the first book that I read this month, it was The Wife Upstairs by Rachel Hawkins. This book was good. I rated it, I had to double check real quick how many stars I rated it, but I rated this 4 stars. So I love thrillers. That's my second favorite genre. And the reason I really enjoyed this book was it was super fast paced. This book is really interesting. I actually found myself not wanting to finish this book while I was reading it. I was kind of slowing down at parts because I didn't want to finish it super quickly. I think that's why I mostly rated it 4 stars, because I was that engaged and that I didn't want it to end. As far as content wise, it was good. There were some plot holes that I kind of had a problem with. That's why I didn't rate it higher. It was pretty solid, a solid thriller. If you like thrillers, I have read, this is my second read by this author. I actually really liked her other thriller. I believe it was called Reckless Girls. Honestly, she's an auto read author for me. So any other book, she has a new book this year, The Villa. Haven't read it, will read it. I recommend this author and this book. My next read was One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. If you guys have watched my other video, you know that Taylor Jenkins Reid is probably my favorite author. Her books are so amazing, and I read this. I've actually had this for a while. This is my copy. I bought this probably a year ago, never read it, decided it's probably time. So I read it and it was amazing. I rated this a whole 5 stars because it was very emotional, very interesting. I'll read you the first line. Listen up. I am finishing up dinner with my family and my fiance when my husband calls. Right? So yeah, from the second I read the first line, I was like, I'm gonna like this book. It's just a very good romance. I highly recommend. She's one of my favorite authors. This might be probably top 3 of her favorite books for me, so I definitely recommend, and I'm glad I read it. Now the next book I read was Pack Up the Moon by Kristin Higgins. This book was, wow. It also had me crying because it gets very emotional towards the last 50 pages of the book. It's super emotional. The whole book is a grief journey. It's all about grief. Love in grief, family in grief, everything. The characters are super lovable. That's something that I really loved and enjoyed about this book. It is a longer, chunkier book. Not really, but it's 430 pages. It's a little bit bigger than your typical romance. Usually those are around 300 pages. Heard a lot about this book, so I put it on my TBR, and luckily it was available from the library, the public library. So I picked it up and totally recommend. It was such a good book, 5 stars. If you are in a grief journey or you have been, I definitely recommend this. Good book. Next book that I read is actually on my iPad. I read it through Libby, which is my public library's like reading app. The Perfect Marriage by Jeneva Rose. I rated this book 4 stars. This is a thriller, a psychological thriller. The reason I rated it 4 stars was because it was incredibly engaging. When I say incredibly engaging, I mean I read this book in 2 days. Like, I could not put it down. There wasn't a slow part at all in this book, which I loved, and I ate it up, literally. Like, it was so, ooh. The premise is it's a married couple. The woman, the wife, is a very good and popular defense lawyer for criminals, and the husband is like a struggling writer. Long story short, he has a mistress. His mistress ends up dead, and who defends him? His wife. His wife is his lawyer. So yeah, it's very twisty. There's plot twists. It's a whodunit mystery. Now, as far as like the entire book as a whole, it was a little predictable, kind of. This is so annoying, but I literally, like, the first 30% of the book, I read it in like one night because I was super engaged, and I told my boyfriend about it because obviously, like, I was enjoying it, and I kind of told him the premise, and I was like, isn't this so cool? And he tells me, oh, I think this person did it. And I was like, okay. And he's annoying because he's really good at like guessing stuff like that, and I was like, if you just spoiled it for me, I'm gonna be mad. And then I finished it like a day later, and he was right. So yeah, next time I learn my lesson, I won't be telling him about, you know, the books that I read until after I finish them, because he might just spoil it for me. But all in all, great book. I definitely recommend. It was another thriller, and like I said, I love thrillers because they're so engaging and fast-paced. So yeah, 4 stars. Next book that I finished, I didn't completely read this book this month, but I did finish it. It is A Clash of Kings by George R.R. Martin. It's the second book in the A Song of Ice and Fire series. If you're familiar with Game of Thrones, these are the books that that whole entire series is based on. This one's chunky. It's like 1,000 pages. Yeah, it's like 1,000 pages. I started this book probably sometime last year, so like over 6 months ago I started reading it. I actually read the entire thing on my Kindle. I do have the physical copy because I have the like entire series in physical copy, but I read this entire book on my Kindle just because, like I said, especially when it's a chunky book, I like to read them physically because it just makes it so much less daunting. I finished this book. It was really good. I don't want to spoil anything, obviously, if you haven't seen or read Game of Thrones, but it kind of sets up a lot of things in action. There's a big war, a lot of different characters. Like, I honestly don't know how much to say. If you haven't seen Game of Thrones, I do not want to spoil it, so I will just say that it's a good book. Okay, wrapping it up now with my 6th book that I read this month is, well, Counterfeit by Kristin Chen. This is a Reese's Book Club pick. If you know anything about me, I love Reese's Book Club. That is actually a really good idea for a future video. Like, all of the Reese's Book Club books that I've read and rating them, because I've read at least like 10 to 12. And I just am always like trying to read more because I love Reese's Book Club. I rated this book 4 stars, and I actually finished it this morning. It's not your typical, well, it's not my typical book. I love romance, thrillers, historical fiction. Those are like my 3 genres that I love and gravitate towards, and this was more of just like a contemporary fiction. Super fast paced. The premise of this book is that Ava is a successful lawyer. She lives in California with her husband who works at Stanford, so you know, that type of community, and she goes on maternity leave, and she's on maternity leave when we encounter her in the book. But then an old friend of hers who's like scandalous and has a reputation hits her up, and she gets pulled into this fake luxury handbag scheme. Like, it's crazy. We're entertaining in that sense that it's not something I usually read about, but it's all about, you know, fashion. There's twists, plot twists. It's about friendship. It's about crime. Like, it's really good. And it was a fast-paced book. It's also a short book. So that's also why I wanted to read it this month, just to kind of top off all the other books. It's nice and short, easy to get through. I read this in about like 3 days, 270 pages. It was great. So those were all the books that I read. Oh my gosh, I'm so like not happy with the hair today, but besides that, those were all the books that I read in February. It is currently the last day of February, so I'm glad I kind of got all of that out. I'm gonna go return 1, 2, 3 of these books back to the library because I haven't hit up the library in a minute, and I'm gonna go pick up my March reads. So I think that will be the next video, my March TBR. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Peace.